In the heart of 1920s, Oklahoma, the Osage Nation found themselves living amidst a terrifying paradox. Their newfound wealth, derived from vast oil deposits beneath their land, was matched only by the growing wave of greed and brutality aimed at their destruction. As the Osage people thrived, they became the targets of one of the most sinister conspiracies in American history. One by one, the Osage were murdered, poisoned, shot, or disappeared, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives and unanswered questions. Behind this relentless violence lay a complex web of deceit, racism, and corruption, orchestrated by people who saw the Osage's fortune as their own ticket to unimaginable riches. At the center of this dark tale stood the newly formed FBI, struggling to unravel the mystery as lawlessness ran rampant. Led by a young and determined investigator, Tom White, the story delves into the haunting reality of a deeply flawed justice system and the insidious ways power can manipulate the vulnerable. This is not just the tale of how a people were wronged. It's the story of the fight for justice in a country where wealth and power can be deadly weapons. The full story of Killers of the Flower Moon is a harrowing exploration of murder, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of unchecked greed. At the turn of the 20th century, the Osage people experienced a rare and unprecedented stroke of fortune. After years of displacement and hardship, the Osage Nation found themselves sitting atop one of the most valuable natural resources of the time: oil. In the early 1900s, oil was discovered beneath their land in Osage County, Oklahoma, making them among the wealthiest people per capita in the world. The wealth came in the form of mineral rights, with the Osage receiving royalties from the oil extracted from their land. But as the Osage flourished, the world around them grew more hostile. The U.S. government, in a series of policy changes, required the Osage to have white guardians to manage their affairs, since it was assumed they were incapable of managing their newfound wealth. This decision created a system ripe for exploitation, as many of these appointed guardians were corrupt or had personal interests in the Osage fortune. The wealthy Osage, now vulnerable to those who saw their wealth as a prize, became increasingly isolated, subjected to racism and greed from all sides. The stage was set for a dark chapter in history, where the Osage people's prosperity would become a dangerous curse, setting the scene for a series of horrific events that would forever change their lives and history itself. It wasn't long before the Osage Nation's wealth attracted more than just admiration. It sparked envy, greed, and a deep-seated desire for control. The first hint of something sinister came in 1921, when Anna Brown, a member of the Osage, was found dead under mysterious circumstances. At first, her death seemed like an unfortunate accident, but as more members of the Osage began to fall ill or die under equally suspicious conditions, a chilling pattern began to emerge. In the following months, the death toll among the Osage grew. Some were poisoned, others shot, and some simply vanished without a trace. One of the most notable cases was that of Molly Burkhart, an Osage woman whose family members began to disappear or die in bizarre and violent ways. Her sister, a well-known figure in the Osage community, was poisoned, while another relative was shot in cold blood. As the deaths mounted, suspicion grew among the Osage people, who feared they were being targeted by a far-reaching conspiracy. Yet, in a society where racism and corruption ran deep, their cries for help were often ignored. For years, these deaths went unsolved, and the Osage were left with little recourse. But with each murder, the situation became more undeniable. The Osage were being systematically eliminated. As the murders continued, the Osage Nation found itself trapped in a growing nightmare, but little was being done to stop it. The local law enforcement was either complicit or too inept to address the escalating violence. It wasn't until 1923 that the case finally attracted the attention of the newly formed Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. The agency, under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, was still in its infancy, and this case would become one of the first major tests of its credibility and ability to tackle complex, high-profile crimes. Tom White, a former Texas Ranger, was assigned to lead the investigation. He and his team of special agents faced an uphill battle from the start. The Osage were hesitant to trust the FBI, given the history of betrayal they had endured. White and his team, however, persisted, and they began interviewing the Osage families, looking for any clues that might explain the mysterious deaths. The investigation was complicated by rampant corruption among local officials. Many were in on the scheme, and they worked hard to obstruct the FBI's efforts. Yet White's team was relentless. With each interview, each piece of evidence uncovered, the investigation began to take shape. White soon realized that the murders were not random acts of violence. They were part of a carefully orchestrated plot to steal the Osage wealth. The FBI, though inexperienced, began to piece together a horrifying conspiracy, but there was still one question left unanswered. Who was behind the plot? As the investigation deepened, the chilling truth began to emerge. The murders were not isolated acts, but part of a systematic conspiracy orchestrated by powerful local figures. The mastermind behind it all was William Hale, a wealthy rancher and a respected figure in the community. Hale had ingratiated himself with the Osage, even managing to secure control over the guardianship of several Osage individuals, including Molly Burkhart, whose family had been particularly hard hit by the deaths. Hale, along with his accomplices, carefully devised a plan to eliminate the Osage one by one and claim their oil-rich land. His strategy was to marry into the Osage families, either through manipulation or by orchestrating the deaths of those who were in the way. Hale's ultimate goal was to gain control of the Osage's mineral rights, which would make him and his partners incredibly wealthy. The plot was gruesome and cold-hearted, but it was executed with calculated precision. The FBI, led by Tom White, uncovered evidence linking Hale to several murders, including the poisoning of Anna Brown and the shooting of her sister, and they traced the conspiracy to other local figures involved in the scheme. As the investigation unfolded, more and more individuals were implicated, including doctors, lawyers, and businessmen, each one willing to betray the Osage for the promise of wealth. But the deeper the FBI dug, the more dangerous the situation became. White and his team began to receive threats, and some of their own agents feared for their lives. The conspiracy was not just about money, it was about power and the lengths to which some would go to seize it. The truth behind the Osage murders was finally coming to light, but bringing those responsible to justice would be far from easy. The FBI, armed with irrefutable evidence, moved forward with arrests, but the legal battle was only beginning. The trial of William Hale, the central figure behind the conspiracy, became a national sensation. The Osage, who had suffered so much, now found themselves in the position of being forced to relive their trauma in the courtroom. Hale was charged with the murder of several Osage, including Anna Brown and her family, and for orchestrating a plan to eliminate the entire Osage Nation's wealth. But despite the mounting evidence, the trial was fraught with complications. Hale's wealth and influence allowed him to hire the best defense lawyers, and many people in the community were still too afraid to testify against him. The defense attempted to discredit the investigation, even accusing the FBI of incompetence and bias. Nonetheless, the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. Hale was eventually convicted for his role in the murders, and several of his accomplices were also sentenced to prison. However, not all those involved in the conspiracy were held accountable. Many of the local officials and business figures who had helped orchestrate the plot were either acquitted or never brought to trial. The legacy of the Osage Murders had a profound impact on the justice system and the way crimes involving Native Americans were prosecuted. The case also highlighted the deep-rooted racism and corruption within law enforcement and the legal system. The FBI, through their investigation, gained national recognition, but the Osage were left with a bitter reminder of how vulnerable they were to the greed and racism that ran through the fabric of American society. In the aftermath, while some of the perpetrators were punished, the Osage people would never fully recover from the pain and loss they suffered. The murder of so many members of their community was a stark reminder of how far some would go for wealth, and how the justice system failed to protect them when they needed it most. The story of the Osage Murders is not just a tale of unspeakable greed and betrayal, but a haunting reminder of the lengths people will go to for wealth and power. It also serves as a stark example of the systemic injustices faced by Native Americans in the early 20th century, where their lives were often treated as expendable commodities. The Osage Murders expose a dark chapter in American history that for far too long went unnoticed or dismissed. The investigation by the FBI, led by Tom White, brought justice to some of the perpetrators, but it also exposed the deep flaws in the legal system that allowed such a conspiracy to go unchecked for so long. While some were convicted and others punished, the emotional scars left on the Osage community remain. As we reflect on the horrific events surrounding the murders of the Osage people, it's clear that this story is more than just a chapter in history. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked greed, the fragility of justice, and the constant fight for equality and fairness. The Osage tragedy continues to remind us of the importance of fighting for justice, no matter how powerful the forces of corruption may seem. If this story has made you reflect on the darker side of history, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into the stories that shaped our world.
Blending subtle tension with deep emotional undertones. Use strings, slow pin and distant passion took a sense of mystery, betrayal, and the dark history of the Osage.